Before we begin, let us come to a point of stillness, not the stillness that the world seeks through effort, but the inner quiet that is already present behind the noise of thought. For in that stillness, we come face to face with the truth that consciousness alone is the substance and activity of all being, and it is from that standpoint that we may consider even the workings of the brain not as a power, but as an instrument through which the infinite expresses itself. My friends, there is a great curiosity in our age about the relationship between spirituality and science. The world of material knowledge seeks to measure, to analyze, to understand through observation. And there is nothing wrong in that, provided we place it in its rightful order. For spiritual truth does not depend upon the discoveries of science. It does not wait for confirmation. Truth is self-evident to the one who has touched the inner presence. Yet, it is a wondrous thing to behold that, as the centuries unfold, scientific inquiry begins to observe glimmers and shadows of what the mystics have known from the beginning, that consciousness is primary, and what we call the body, the mind, and the brain are but forms through which consciousness interprets itself. We will speak today of what happens in the brain when one ceases to live from the human I, the personality sense, and begins to live from the spiritual I am, the one infinite self. But let us hold one principle firmly before us. The brain does not give us consciousness. Consciousness gives us the brain. The brain is not the creator, it is the created. It is not the source. It is an avenue of expression. If, then, there are changes that appear in the brain, new patterns, new harmonies, new silences, they are not causes, they are effects of the realization that I and the Father are one, that the life which animates this being is not personal but divine. When we speak of I am, we are not speaking of the human sense of identity. We are not referring to the name, the body, the memory, or the history. We are speaking of the eternal presence that utters itself as I, the same I that functioned as Jesus Christ, the same I that revealed truth through Moses, Elijah, and the prophets, the same I that is alive at this moment as the center of your very being. It is this I that is God. It is this I that is consciousness. It is this I that is the only true self you have ever had. When this realization dawns, even faintly, the outer instrument, the mind, the emotions, the body begins to reflect a new order. Fear diminishes. Tension relaxes. The nervous system comes into harmony. And yes, the brain itself begins to function in a different rhythm, for it is now under the government of the spirit rather than the agitation of the personal self. But do not misunderstand. We are not seeking to change the brain. We are not engaged in psychology or physiology. We are not trying to awaken certain regions of the mind or suppress others. No. We seek only to know God aright. And in that knowing, the body inevitably reflects the peace of the soul. So let us set aside all desire to use truth for our benefit. Let us forget the wish to enhance our experience through spiritual knowledge. Let us simply abide in the recognition that the presence which says I is the only life there is, the only intelligence functioning, the only power that acts. And if there is harmony in the body or mind as a result of this realization, it is because harmony was the truth from the beginning. In this time together, we will explore how the brain reflects this inner awakening, not because the brain is important in itself, but because it bears witness to the great spiritual truth that underlies all being, that reality is formed from within, outward, never from the outer to the inner. Let us proceed, then, not as students of science, nor as seekers of mystical experience, but as those who rest in the simple awareness, I am, and that is enough. Let us again come to that inner place where the word I is heard, not the I that the world has trained us to defend, protect, and improve, but the I that simply is. If you listen quietly, without trying to make anything happen, you may feel that this I is not located within the body, not confined to the mind, not bound to the story of your years on earth. It is present, yet without boundary. It is aware, yet without effort. It is here, yet not here as a person, but as presence. This I is the heart of all spiritual truth. And unless we understand it, no amount of study, meditation, or practice will free us from the illusion of separation. The great error of the human sense is that it believes the word I refers to a finite self, a self born into time, subject to circumstance, influenced by conditions, and vulnerable to the world. But this is not the I of Scripture. This is not the I of Christ. This is not the I that Goldsmith asks us to awaken to. When Jesus declared, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he was not speaking as a man. He was speaking from the infinite identity that was his true being and yours. When he said, I am the light of the world, he was not describing a personal virtue, but the radiance of God expressing itself as the consciousness of the individual. And when he said, before Abraham was, I am, he pointed to the timeless nature of identity before body, before mind, before form, before the world. This same I is the reality of your being. There are not many I's scattered across the earth, each with its own private existence. There is but one I, appearing as infinite individual expressions, yet never divided. The eye that looks out through your eyes is the same eye that looked out through the eyes of every sage, every prophet, every illumined soul throughout history. It is the same eye that animates every living thing. So long as we cling to the belief that I is a separate person, we will remain bound to fear, conflict, and limitation. For the personal sense is never safe, never complete, never at peace. It lives in perpetual reaction to conditions and is always seeking a better circumstance. But when, through inner revelation, we begin to sense that I is not personal but divine, we touch a freedom that no circumstance can give or take away. This realization is not a philosophy, it is an experience. It is the moment when the walls of personal identity begin to dissolve and we feel the presence living us, breathing us, thinking us. It is the moment we understand that consciousness is not inside the body, but the body is within consciousness, and consciousness is I. It is this shift of identity from personal to impersonal, from human to divine, that brings harmony into expression. For the body, the mind, and even the brain can only reflect the consciousness that governs them. If the consciousness is fearful, the brain will be agitated. If the consciousness is burdened, the mind will be confused. If the consciousness is divided, the body will show it. But when the consciousness rests in the realization, I am, the instrument reflects peace. Hear this well. You do not become the I am. You recognize that you have never been anything else. You cannot achieve God consciousness. You awaken to it. When you say, I am tired, I am afraid, I am unworthy, you are not describing a condition, you are misidentifying the I. You are attributing the qualities of the finite to the infinite. You are placing the burden of the world upon the shoulders of the divine. This is the root of all suffering. But when you come to a place where you can rest and simply know, I am, without adding anything after it, without qualifying it, without personalizing it, then the truth of your being begins to reveal itself. Identity shifts, the false sense dissolves, and what remains is the pure awareness of I, untouched, unconditioned, unchanging. This is the foundation of spiritual life. This is the beginning of healing. This is the opening through which grace flows. For grace does not enter a personal self. It reveals that the personal self has no real existence. Let us hold, then, throughout our journey, this central truth. There is only one I. That I is God. And that I is the essence of your being. Understand this, and you will understand the entire spiritual path. Let us continue now in the same stillness with which we began, for without inner quiet there can be no true hearing of spiritual truth. The things of spirit are not grasped through mental effort. They are revealed as we become receptive, as thought yields to awareness and personality steps aside. In this atmosphere of silence, the deeper meaning of I unfolds. We have spoken of the nature of identity, and now we turn to observe how the shifting of identity affects what the world calls the mind and the brain. But always remember, we do not study the brain because it has power. We study it only to see how the form responds when it is no longer animated by the belief in a personal self. There is a center within the human mind that modern science describes as the part of the brain responsible for self-reference, worry, the story of me, the endless stream of thought through which the personal sense maintains its illusion of existence. It rehearses the past, anticipates the future, defends its position, and concerns itself with how it appears to the world. This is the activity of the personal ego, and it is constantly at work. In spiritual terms, this is what Scripture calls the carnal mind, the mind that is enmity against God, not because it is evil, but because it is a false sense of identity. It is not a mind created by God. It is a belief in a selfhood apart from God. And as long as this belief is active, the brain responds with agitation, tension, and restlessness. It must do so, for it is reflecting the consciousness that governs it. But something remarkable begins to happen when the truth of our being dawns. When even for a moment, the awareness arises that I is not the personality but the presence. When the personal sense softens, loosens its grip, becomes transparent, the activity of this ego center begins to quiet, not through will, not through discipline, not through trying to be calm, but through the simple recognition that the I we have been defending has no reality. You see, the ego cannot survive when it is not believed in. It requires attention. It requires identification. And when the attention returns to the I am, the ego finds nothing to cling to. As this awareness deepens, the mind no longer needs to rehearse anxieties. It no longer needs to plan its survival. It no longer needs to compare itself with others or seek validation in the world. It comes to rest, not because we have trained it to rest, but because the very foundation of its activity, the belief in a selfhood separate from God, has been removed. The brain, being an instrument, responds meekly to this shift. The regions associated with fear become quieter. The circuits associated with rumination grow still. And in their place arises a sense of spaciousness, not mental emptiness, but a living silence in which the presence is felt. In Goldsmith's language, this is the peace that passeth understanding, the peace that is not produced by the mind but revealed when the mind is no longer attempting to govern life. It is the peace that appears when the government is upon his shoulder, when we acknowledge the I, that is God, as the only true identity. This is the first great change, and it prepares the way for all others. For when the mind is no longer drawing its life from the personal sense, it becomes an instrument through which divine ideas may flow. And when the mind is quiet, the body responds with harmony, the emotions with calm, and the brain with a new orderliness. Let us remember, we do not seek to silence the mind. We seek only to know the truth of I. And when that truth is known, the mind silences itself. In this recognition, the noise of the ego begins to dissolve, and a new center emerges, the center that is not in the skull, but in the eternal I am. From that center flows peace, guidance, clarity, and a gentle assurance that we are not living life. Life is living us. Let us rest in that knowing for a moment. I am, and because I am, all is well. Let us continue gently, without rushing, for truth reveals itself only in an atmosphere of receptivity. The mind that seeks to understand with intellect will miss the depth of what is being offered, but the heart that is still, the awareness that is open, will hear what cannot be spoken in words. There is a point in our spiritual unfoldment where we begin to notice that the body itself reflects the state of consciousness we are living in, not because the body has power, nor because the body creates harmony or discord, but because it is an instrument through which consciousness reveals its condition. When fear is active, the body tightens. When worry governs, the breath becomes shallow. When the personal self is striving, the nervous system becomes strained. These are not causes but effects of believing oneself to be a separate, finite entity. In the world of science, they speak of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, of stress hormones and biological responses. They tell us that the body moves into fight or flight when the mind perceives threat. And all of this is true on the level of appearance, but it is not the truth of being. For behind these responses stands the false sense of self, the belief in an I that must protect itself from life. When we live from the personal identity, the nervous system is rarely at rest. It must always be on guard, always anticipating, always interpreting life through the lens of survival. But the moment we awaken to the truth that I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me, something profound takes place. Fear has no home in the presence of God, and when fear dissolves, the body relaxes as naturally as a flower opening to the sun. This release is not achieved through effort. You cannot force the body into peace. You cannot command the nervous system to calm itself. You cannot make the heart slow or the breath deepen through will. But when the realization dawns, the I that I have been trying to protect is not me, the entire being softens. The nervous system yields, the breath becomes gentle, and the body enters a state that science calls rest, but spirit knows as peace. This peace is not emotional tranquility. It is not the temporary quiet that comes when circumstances improve. It is the peace that is the nature of God, the peace that I am. It does not arise because something has been fixed. It arises because the truth of identity has been recognized. You see, the nervous system is responding not to external conditions, but to the consciousness interpreting those conditions. And when consciousness knows itself as the I am, untouched by appearance, untroubled by form, uninfluenced by the world, the body receives that knowing as safety. That safety is not the safety of circumstances, it is the safety of truth. Many have asked, how can I find peace? And the answer is always the same. You cannot find peace while believing that you are a person in a dangerous world. You find peace when you realize that the I of your being is spirit, and spirit is never threatened. Once this is seen, the body follows. The nervous system becomes a faithful witness to the recognition of truth. Muscles unclench without being told. Breath deepens without instruction. The heart rate stabilizes without technique. All of this occurs because the personal sense of I is no longer gripping the reins of experience. This is grace. It is not achieved. It is revealed. In this state, the body becomes an instrument of harmony, reflecting the peace that emanates from the center of being. And this peace is not fragile. It does not depend on silence around us or kindness from others or order in the world. It is not disturbed by conditions because it does not arise from conditions. It arises from the presence that declares, "Be still and know that I am God." Let us rest, then, in the assurance that the nervous system seeks no technique. It seeks only truth. And as we abide in the awareness that the I which lives us is God, the entire body will bear witness to that realization. This is the spiritual meaning behind physiological peace. God, recognized as the self, is the healer, the harmonizer, the quieting influence that governs all form. Remain a moment in that awareness. I am peace, not as a quality I possess, but as the truth of my being. Let us continue now in the same stillness that has accompanied us from the beginning. For what we speak of in this section cannot be grasped by the mind that is accustomed to interpreting life through the five senses. It must be heard with the inner ear, the ear that listens not to words but to the spirit that breathes through the words. There is a moment in our spiritual awakening when perception itself begins to change. Not because we make an effort to see differently, but because the center from which we look has shifted. When the personal sense of I governs perception, everything appears fragmented. The world seems divided into good and evil, mine and yours, friend and enemy, desirable and undesirable. Life becomes a series of judgments and comparisons, each one reinforcing the belief in separate selves. This is what the world calls normal perception, but it is not spiritual vision. It is the vision of the personal ego, the vision of one who believes themselves to be a self apart from God. And so long as this sense of separation persists, the brain must interpret life as conflict, tension, and uncertainty. The world appears dangerous because we believe ourselves to be vulnerable. The world appears divided because we believe ourselves to be separate. But when the realization dawns that I is not a person looking outward upon the world, but infinite consciousness appearing as individual being, a new seeing begins. This seeing is not an achievement. It is not produced by mental work or spiritual technique. It is the natural seeing of the one who no longer identifies with the personal sense. In Goldsmith's language, this is the moment when we begin to see through appearances. We no longer accept the forms of the world at face value. We no longer respond to them as powers. We behold them as images in consciousness, images that have no life, no authority, no substance, apart from the one who is living as all being. And when this happens, the brain responds with a new order of activity. The centers associated with fear grow quiet. The circuits associated with reactivity diminish. The regions associated with intuition, empathy, and holistic understanding become more active. But again, these changes are not the cause of spiritual awakening. They are the shadow of it. They are the body's way of bearing witness to the truth that consciousness has remembered itself. You see, spiritual vision is not a matter of seeing what the eyes show, but seeing the reality behind what the eyes show. It is the recognition that every person we meet, Every circumstance we encounter, every object we behold, is an appearance within the infinite consciousness that is the I am. When perception is rooted in the personal self, we see others as separate minds, each with their own will, each with their own desires, each with their own flaws. But when the I of our being is recognized as God, there is no longer my mind and your mind. There is only mind infinitely expressed. And so we behold others not as personalities, not as bodies, not as histories, but as individualizations of the same one that is our own true being. This recognition softens the heart. It dissolves judgment. It ends resentment. It brings compassion, not because we try to be compassionate, but because we can no longer behold a self apart from God. And the brain, in its faithful service as an instrument, reflects this shift with coherence, clarity, and ease. Spiritual vision is not mystical. It is natural. It is the way consciousness sees when it is no longer clouded by the belief in separation. It is the seeing that Jesus spoke of when he said, "Judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment." Righteous judgment is the seeing of reality. It is the beholding of the Christ in every individual, even when the appearance seems to contradict it. To live from this vision is to walk through the world untouched by its fears, unmoved by its divisions, unburdened by its conflicts, not because the world has changed, but because the one who is seeing is no longer the personal sense, but the I am. Let us rest in this recognition. The world you see is the reflection of the identity from which you look. If you look as a person, the world appears fragmented. If you look as the presence, the world reveals its oneness. Remain a moment in that inner seeing, not with the eyes, but with the awareness that recognizes the same life, the same self, the same I in all. Let us, once again, settle into that inner quiet where truth is revealed not by the mind, not through thought, but through the gentle awareness that stands behind thought. For in this stillness, we begin to perceive one of the great spiritual principles that governs the entire experience of life. All suffering is sustained by resistance, and all resistance is the activity of the personal self. In the world, resistance is considered a natural response to difficulty. When faced with illness, the person resists it. When faced with lack, they resist it. When faced with conflict, they resist it. Yet, each act of resistance is born out of fear, and fear is born out of the belief that there exists something, some power separate and apart from God. In the spiritual life, we learn that there are not two powers. There are not opposing forces battling for dominance. There is only one presence, one life, one infinite reality expressing itself as all being. The moment we recognize this, resistance becomes unnecessary. For what is there to resist when we know that God is the only presence and the only power? Now let us consider how this truth expresses itself in the body. When the personal sense of self believes it must fight against conditions, fight against illness, fight against circumstances, fight against the world, the body is flooded with the chemistry of fear, tension, stress hormones, the tightening of muscles, the quickening of breath. The body behaves as a creature besieged because the consciousness believes itself to be a creature besieged. This is the physiology of separation. But when identity shifts, when one rests in the awareness that the I of our being is infinite spirit, the entire mechanism of resistance begins to dissolve, not through effort, not through discipline, not through forcing the body into relaxation, but through a simple, direct knowing. There is nothing in this universe that can oppose the presence that I am. As this truth settles into consciousness, the body receives it as peace. The chemistry of fear is replaced with the chemistry of calm. The nervous system moves out of defense and into trust. The heart slows. The breath deepens. The muscles release. And the regions of the brain associated with alarm become still. These changes do not heal us. They reflect that healing has already taken place in consciousness. What is healing, after all, in the infinite way? It is not the adjusting of matter, nor the correcting of the body. It is the dissolving of the false identity that believed itself separate from God. When this belief dissolves, the body mirrors that freedom. This is why Goldsmith taught that the moment of healing is the moment of recognition, not the moment when the condition changes, but the moment when the truth of identity shines through, even briefly. The body may follow that recognition instantly or gradually, but the healing is already accomplished the instant the personal sense yields. Resistance cannot survive in the presence of I am. It simply melts away. And when resistance melts, what remains is harmony, harmony in the mind, harmony in the emotions, harmony in the body, not because harmony was created, but because it was revealed. Harmony is the natural state of being when we are not resisting the one that we are. Let us place this into simple terms. When you struggle, you affirm separation. When you resist, you energize the very condition you fear. When you fight, you strengthen the illusion. But when you rest in the awareness I am, all false powers lose their seeming reality. This is not passivity. It is not resignation. It is recognition. It is standing still in the truth that the I of you is the governing principle of all form. And when consciousness stands still, the body stands still. When consciousness releases its grip, the body relaxes. And when consciousness recognizes its oneness with God, the body cannot help but reflect that oneness. So let us now rest in this quiet knowing. I do not need to resist anything. The presence that I am is the only activity, the only law, the only power operating in my experience. In that presence, all stress, all fear, all tension dissolves. Let that awareness settle into you, not as a belief, not as an affirmation, but as a simple recognition of what has always been true. Let us continue now in the same atmosphere of calm receptivity, for it is only in such an atmosphere that the deeper currents of spirit can be felt. The mind that is busy, the mind that seeks, the mind that strives, cannot receive inspiration. For inspiration does not come through thought, but through the silence behind thought. And it is this silence, this inner yielding that allows the infinite to express itself as guidance, intuition, and spiritual direction. In our human sense of life, we have been conditioned to believe that we must figure everything out through mental effort. We plan, we calculate, we analyze, we worry, we compare, we try to foresee every outcome. And all the while, we assume that our personal understanding is the source of our decisions. But my friends, the personal self has no true guidance to offer. It knows only the past, the accumulated impressions of memory, the limited reasoning of the finite mind. The personal self does not know the way, for it has no access to reality. Only the I am knows, for the I am is infinite, intelligence appearing as individual consciousness. When the human mind steps aside, when it ceases to dictate and begins to listen, a new order of guidance begins to unfold quietly, gently, without fanfare, without excitement, without effort. It comes as a soft inner knowing, a direction that feels natural, effortless, inevitable. This is one of the great fruits of living from I am, the shift from self-directed living to God-directed living. Goldsmith often said that the secret of the spiritual life is not in accumulating knowledge, but in becoming a receptacle for the infinite. When the personal sense is quiet, the infinite reveals itself and expresses as your thought, your movement, your decisions, your life. Now consider how this spiritual truth expresses itself through the brain. When the mind ceases its constant striving and drops into silence, the brain reflects that silence with coherence, integration, and spaciousness. The circuits responsible for insight awaken. The regions associated with creativity, intuition, and higher order understanding become active. The left and right hemispheres, which so often operate in conflict, begin to harmonize. This harmony is the brain's reflection of the deeper harmony of consciousness. But again, let us be very clear. The brain does not create inspiration. The brain only receives the imprint of inspiration. True guidance comes from a dimension beyond the intellect. It comes from the source of all being, the I that I am. In this recognition, we begin to understand why striving blocks inspiration. The personal sense tries to govern the mind, and in doing so, it creates noise. This noise drowns out the subtle movement of spirit. But when the personal sense dissolves, even for a moment, the infinite has room to speak, not in words, not in dramatic revelations, but in the quiet certainty that arises from within, an impulse, a direction, a peace that says, "This is the way, walk ye in it." This is how the great works are accomplished, not through human effort, but through divine impulse. When you live from the center of I am, your decisions are not forced, they unfold. Your creativity is not manufactured, it flows. Your insight is not produced, it appears. And your life begins to feel guided, supported, carried by something far wiser than the finite mind. This is why Goldsmith taught the practice of inner listening, not listening for messages, not listening for voices, not listening for signs, but listening for the presence itself, the presence that, when felt even faintly, becomes the source of inspiration for every activity of your life. In such moments, the brain becomes a servant of the soul, not its master. Thought becomes the vehicle of intuition, not the creator of it, and the entire instrument of your being comes under the gentle government of the infinite. Let us then remember this simple truth. Guidance is not something we seek. Guidance is something we receive when we are still enough to hear. Remain a moment in that stillness, not to obtain guidance, but to recognize the presence that is already guiding. Not to force inspiration, but to rest in the awareness that the I, which is your being, is infinite intelligence itself. Let us come once more to that inner quiet in which truth may be revealed. For what we speak of now is not a technique, not a method, and not a spiritual exercise as the world understands such things. It is the heart of the infinite way. It is the living center of our entire practice. It is the way by which the truth moves from concept to realization, from belief to experience, from the mind to the very essence of being. This is what Goldsmith called practicing the presence. Practicing the presence is not the repetition of words. It is not the use of affirmations. It is not a mental attempt to bring about a change in our experience. Rather, it is the gentle return, again and again, to the awareness that the I which lives us is God and God alone. In our human experience, the mind is constantly drawn outward toward appearances, toward conditions, toward people, toward circumstances. It judges, it analyzes, it reacts, it resists, and in every reaction, the personal sense is strengthened. The mind becomes entangled in the world it sees, and the world it sees is nothing more than its own belief system projected outward. Practicing the presence is the process by which we withdraw our attention from this outward pull, not forcibly, not with strain, not with effort, but by remembering that there is a deeper reality than what the senses report. There is a presence within us closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, that is the true life of our being. This practice is simple, but it is not easy, for it requires the surrender of personal identity. It requires that we release our dependence upon the human mind, the human will, the human effort. It requires a willingness to be still in the midst of activity, to be quiet in the midst of noise, to be centered in the midst of change. When we practice this presence, even briefly, something shifts within us. The mind slows, the senses soften, the emotions calm, the body relaxes, and the brain begins to function in a new rhythm, a rhythm not born of fear or desire, but of the deep peace that flows from the center of being. But let us remember, the purpose of practicing the presence is not to calm the mind or to relax the body. These may happen, but they are not the goal. The purpose is singular: to recognize God as the eye of our being, to recognize the presence that has always been there. The world tries to use spiritual practice to change conditions, to get health, to get supply, to get peace, to get answers. But in the infinite way, we do not practice to get. We practice to recognize. We practice to remember the truth that has been eternally established. I am is my life. I am is my safety. I am is my peace. I am is the source of every good. When this recognition becomes steady, not through effort, but through deep inner knowing, the outer life begins to conform to the harmony that has always existed within. In this state, problems no longer represent threats. They become shadows without substance. Needs no longer appear as lack. They reveal themselves as opportunities for the I am to express its fullness. Relationships no longer feel like emotional negotiations. They become expressions of the same presence meeting itself. Now, how do we practice this? Presence, not through long meditations, not through hours of contemplation, but through frequent, gentle moments of remembrance throughout the day. A pause, a moment of silence, a turning inward, a quiet acknowledgement. Father, I thank thee that thou art here. Or simply, not I the person, but I as the infinite. This is practicing the presence not to change the world, but to see through it, not to improve life, but to awaken to the life that already is, not to strengthen the personal self, but to dissolve it. And as this practice becomes natural, you will find that guidance appears before you ask, harmony unfolds before you seek it, supply meets you without your pursuit, and peace accompanies you without your striving. These are not the results of practice, they are the revelations of reality. When the obstacles of personal identity fall away, let us then remain for a moment in the gentle awareness of the presence. Do not try to feel anything. Do not attempt to think anything. Simply rest in the truth. I am, and that is enough. As we come to the close of this journey together, let us not think of it as an ending, for nothing in spirit ends. What we have shared is not something to be remembered intellectually, not something to be stored in memory or repeated as words. It is something to be recognized again and again, until it becomes the atmosphere in which you live, move, and have your being. The entire purpose of these teachings and of this time we have spent together is to bring you to one simple awareness. The I that you are is the presence of God, not someday, not when you have perfected yourself, not when outer conditions change, but now, right here, in this breath, in this awareness. If you have felt even a moment of peace during this time, that peace was not given to you by words. It was not generated by thought. It was not created by teaching. It was the nature of your own being revealed when the mind grew quiet. If you experienced a softening in the body, a release of tension, a sense of spaciousness within, this was the body bearing witness to the truth that the personal sense had loosened its grip, even briefly. The nervous system responded to reality. The brain reflected the nature of spirit. The body, as always, followed consciousness. If you sensed clarity or insight or a deep gentleness, these were not gifts from outside you. They were the natural expression of the I am as your very awareness. And so, as we complete this teaching, let us not leave it behind. Let us not return to the belief that life must be met as a person, struggling, planning, resisting, fearing. Return instead to the simple truth that has been quietly revealed throughout every section. There is only one I, the infinite I, the divine I, the I am, and that I is your identity. Everything in your experience will change when this becomes more than an idea, when it becomes a lived recognition. Not all at once, not through force, but gently, progressively, in the rhythm of grace. There will still be moments when the mind forgets, when fear arises, when the personal sense reasserts itself. This is not failure. This is the human appearance dissolving a little at a time. In those moments, do not struggle. Do not criticize yourself. Do not try to get back to the presence. Simply pause, become still, and remember, I have never left the presence. The presence has never left me. The I of me and the Father are one. And in that remembrance, whether it takes a second or a minute or an hour, the truth will reassert itself, and you will feel the gentle return to the center. This is your practice now, not perfection, but remembrance, not conquest, but surrender, not effort, but receptivity. Let the presence live you. Let the presence move you. Let the presence be your seeing, your hearing, your speaking, your doing, for in truth, it already is. There is no personal self directing your life. There never has been. There is only the infinite appearing as you, expressing through you, unfolding in you. So let us end where we began, in silence. For silence is the language of the soul, the dwelling place of the I am, the sanctuary in which the truth is recognized without a single word. Rest now in that silence. Rest in the gentle awareness of the presence. Rest in the knowing, I am, and that is enough.